Mais étant donné qu'on a très peu de temps lors des présentations, on vous demande de garder vos interventions pour après dans la période de questions.
What is this?
Yeah, there's a funny little ringing thing going on. I'm not sure if it's some kind of silent alarm or anything, but I don't think so. Oh, you're right. That's weird. It's because it was the timer. Okay, it's me. That's really embarrassing. I was timing Julia, and then I didn't turn it off. Whoa. Okay. Donc, je présente Harvey. Harvey Giesbrecht is a practicing psychoanalyst and also has a doctorate in art history. And when I contacted him, he actually had been thinking, well, were you right? You were already engaged in writing a chapter on Jake and Dinos, or?
No,
Not yet.
I'll
Okay.
use some of the material, yes.
But a fantastic turn of events, and we're really pleased to have him here with us. And take it away, Harvey.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. And good evening, everyone. And let me congratulate DHC for bringing this show here. And the DHC has had quite a record since its inception. I think it was in 2007, right? Fall of 2007, of very strong shows, starting with Mark Quinn, of course, the young British artist, of the Young British Artists Group. So congratulations. I suggested that my intervention should be posed as the question, does psychoanalysis interpret the work of art or learn from it? This is somewhat rhetorical. Most of us have long ago given up the what we could call the pathographic model of Freud, where art, literature as well, is more or less, I'm thinking of his essay on creative writers and daydreaming, where art is more or less treated as a symptom. Traditional psychoanalysis started with Freud's essay on Leonardo da Vinci, and Freud thought that Leonardo's failure to finish much of his work, his restless and displaceable intellect, his social isolation, and his homosexuality were in need of explanation. Freud used as part of his method an analysis of one of Leonardo's paintings, Mary, St. Anne, and the Christ Child. His method, Freud's method of picking out what he thought was repressed imagery in the painting, is not necessarily a bad thing, especially since he tried to read its unconscious meanings and tie it to other biographic evidence and so on. Of course, sometimes art could and does index personal emotional disturbance, but that is a matter for the artist and his or her analyst or therapist or whoever to determine. Symptomatic equivalences cannot be deduced in any credible way through the art itself, unless the artist is available to make those connections. So I would say that the tradition I come from, traditional psychoanalysis as it analyzed the work of art, took a position, thank you very much, took a position removed from and above the work, as if to say, we analysts can see how your work is a symptom. There are sophisticated versions of this kind of strategy, and Parveen Adams, for example, does this in her discussion of Lacan, discussing James Joyce. And there's a certain validity in this kind of a formula of art equals neurosis interpretation, if, as I say, there's an invitation to do so, if there's a willingness or a desire on the part of the artist, him or herself, to make connections of that sort. But for example, that kind of outdated psychoanalytic equivalence might go something like this with respect to a show like this. The work of the Chapmans is full of raw aggression. Perhaps they're projecting, externalizing their own aggression, disavowing it, finding a target out there. the neurotic compromise to exhibit and express the aggression, chopped up bodies, what have you, but pass it off as critique. The analyst would then suggest that in this way the aggressive drive is satisfactorily expressed, while the conscious intention seems to be the opposite. This would be an inference that one has to look for root causes of this excessive aggression in their personal histories. Most of the time, this kind of exercise is itself a hostile reduction, and I certainly don't approve of it. Now, it is true, though, that any work of art can index intense internal emotional states or historical trauma, and much contemporary art does that because it has become free to do so and has been reacting to and contributing to the massive aesthetic shift we've seen in the past 5 or 6 decades. But we are misguided if we feel we need to label this as pathological in any way. The gallery space promotes or creates a protected space that allows the astonishing aesthetic experiment that we're going through to take place. So avoiding the interpretive impulse leaves us free to respond affectively to the work. Before I try to do that with the Chapman's work, let me note that there's a tremendous resonance between the images, objects, and raw materials and my own toolkit as an analyst. For example, the analyst is always aware of condensations, displacements, discharge of built-up psychic energy, especially in dream interpretation. These raw materials are essentially what the Chapmans use. Television drawings are straight out of my own infantile dream world. Fluffy kitties with too many eyes, monster bugs with horns, condensations, displacements, metaphor, metonymy are everywhere. Ronald McDonald on the cross, hybrid children monsters, penises and anus displaced all over the place, children with penis noses and weird tubular piggy mouths, fuckface. The psychoanalyst Wilfred Bion called these toxic fragments of intense affective and sensory experience that infants, for example, live through beta elements. These need to be converted by a mother or a loving other into thoughts or comfort or something meaningful. The conversion of such beta elements into thinking does not occur because the mind is already there, but rather the mind is created by its psychological function of bridging that Bion thought had to do with the baby's experience of contained and container. For example, the nipple in mouth, penis in vagina. The other in the environment enables linking of and detoxification of beta elements and creation of symbolic, meaningful worlds. But the reverse process of destroying linking temporarily is just as crucial for human creative function. The Chapmans would seem to be rather good at the process of rediscovering our beta elements. So I'm suggesting that art can give us some insight, not so much as a therapeutic redemption, but into the meaning of archaic fantasies, primal fantasies, raw drives of sexuality, aggression, and narcissism. In short, the beta elements have potential for meaning. They're paradoxical demands for interpretation by us. They have paradoxical demands for interpretation by us, the audience. The artist in our era is free to cast in front of us these raw elements, these fragments, unmetabolized fantasies. We need to respond. We need to search within ourselves to understand what is going on. Cultural cynical shortcut, of course, is easily available. Pop media appropriates artistic rawness and quickly packages the rawness, converting it frequently to box office appeal. This work seems like a vast, emergent, unconscious universe. The Chapmans, as they dip into prehistory of the psyche and indeed life on Earth, show how there is a recurrent mayhem of eat or be eaten with added benefit for humans, of the threat of castration in all its forms, institutionalized and brought to assembly line proportions by Nazi killing machines. A lesson for psychoanalysis. Although we are conscious of human aggression, we have repressed most of what Lacan would call the real of trauma of our history and prehistory, and act as if everything is just fine. Here's another insight for psychoanalysis. Forget about the idea of sublimation. They themselves use terms such as desublimated and titles such as Return of the Repressed. By sublimation, psychoanalysis has meant a displacement from direct expression of sexuality to so-called higher aims of libidinal energy. In this show, for example, in one vitrine in the other building, on the back, there's a text which I can't remember who the text was by, but it's overwritten, and text referring to sublimation. The fact is it's overwritten as suggesting the concept no longer applies. Drawing over Goya, working at contemporary symbols, working of contemporary symbols into African art, they re-libidinize art. They are desublimating. The human psychic apparatus, for example, in the death machines, is revisualized as a primitive libidinal squirt machine. Hammer blows are directed right into the brain and appear to trigger some sort of orgasm. Much contemporary art shows this kind of desublimation or even demetaphorization. Laurie Anderson once said about Chris Burden and his famous gallery shoot, he doesn't understand metaphors. Well, he does understand, but he demetaphorises language by acting it out. This is certainly instructive for psychoanalysis, since human culture has made this sharp swerve in the language of Stephen Greenblatt, thus opening up into new explorations of the very meaning of visual culture. We can ask what accounts for it. And we must ask what accounts for it. If we look at the show in overview, it's a grandly funny, tragic, dystopic mix-up, which at the same time describes exactly the desperate nonchalance of the natural process of eros and thanatos. Freud's greatest insights, coining these or theorizing these terms, proved to be one of his least popular, the notion of the life instinct and the death instinct, which he thought was fused, these two fused into all life forms. These two instincts, he suggested, paradoxically produce the same outcome. Eros seeks to copulate, reproduce, ultimately unite in all life forms, explore every possible and potential addition of the basic pattern. When all is libidinized, erotized, all will be quiescent. Thanatos will achieve quiescence as well by destroying all. All will be returned to the inorganic. In that room, one of the banners is, "We dream of lapsing back into zero." Is there any stronger image of such fusion than this show? Okay, I have 3 minutes, 2 minutes. I think the humor is so compelling here in this demonstration of what I have just called the fusion of eros and thanatos. Because by forcing our identifications with the Ku Kluxers, by putting Ronald McDonald on the cross and turning everything upside down and on its head, the Chapmans show very, very convincingly that you cannot easily disentangle aggression from libido or from eros or from an erotic enjoyment of life. The humor is the thing that glues it all together. And humor is the thing that revitalizes constantly the universe, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. I'd just like to conclude then with an agreement with our first presenter, Christine, who spoke of one of the solutions of the problem of evil as being not worked out here, obviously, but as presented as if it's in a laboratory. And I think the aesthetic project of the last 50 years has come to be that excruciating but funny and completely unpredictable laboratory of what's really inside in our unconscious. The Chapman's work pretty much turns everything on its head, especially ideas like seeing hell as a representation of the horrors of World War II. They call that a quite impressive misreading. My own misreading may not even be impressive, but maybe I should use a Chapman strategy and swear on a bag of fries that I don't actually have one at this point yet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Harvey. So our last speaker before we get to open it up to questions is Meredith Carruthers. Meredith Carruthers is one, well, I don't want to say one half, but she's a half of, oh no, she's two parts of a whole, I guess, or a hole in a hole making another big hole, with Susanna Wesley and a project called Leisure. It's the artist and independent curatorial project, and I thought it would be interesting to invite them to talk, or her, because Susanna just had a baby, so Meredith's speaking on her own today, to talk to collaboration. And I think, from what I understand about Leisure, there's a lot of affinity with what drives Jake and Dinos Chapman to collaborate. Meredith?
Yeah, so I'm here on my own to present today because Susanna just announced and brought into the world a new person on Thursday. So Paul Edouard is now part of the environment of Leisure. So it's a very exciting week for our project. When we were preparing for this talk, we wanted to take as a starting point a bit of information that Cheryl was so kind enough to send to us about how the process of collaboration works for Jake and Dinos Chapman. And some of the guiding questions that we gleaned from the Chapmans were, what is the task and role of the artist? And what is the identity of the artist? The Chapmans were really rising up around the same time that Susanna and I were in our undergrads and also going to grad school around the early 90s and then into the 2000s. So those questions that they were asking and that they were exhibiting answers to during that period were quite important for us also. By working in collaboration, the Chapmans feel they can explore mythologies of the artist, such as the lone genius in the studio, something that Susanna and I brush up against and push back against as much as possible, as well as questions around authorship and originality. As a duo, no one actually knows whose hand is involved. So that idea of the hand of the artist, which is a very interesting one to talk about. They joke that this practice that they've developed is a defense mechanism, something that they can hide against and behind. They can be behind each other, they're related, they have a shared vocabulary, a shared aesthetic, and a shared hand. They can point that finger towards each other if they're ever under attack, and so it allows them some sort of liberty or freedom that maybe they wouldn't take otherwise. We wanted to throw a couple more elements into the mix when talking about collaboration and about conversation. There are three points that we wanted to bring forward. One was the idea of the ellipsis, sort of the idea of trailing off. One, the idea of duration. What is a long conversation or a looping conversation? And one, another idea about the two-sided entity, something that perhaps Harvey might want to talk about as well. In terms of the ellipsis, for us, the idea of the ellipsis comes in as a shorthand for leaving intentional holes and open places. An ellipsis is a series of 3 dots Usually it indicates an intentional omission of a word in writing. It's part of a sentence, a whole section from a text that can be left out without altering its original meaning. Depending on the context and placement of this small mark of punctuation, you can have a slight pause, you can have a nervous or awkward ending, you can have a period of silence. This mark of punctuation for us is an interesting illustration for a working process that involves filling in for each other, particularly on a moment like today where one person's representing a greater whole. In our own conversation, there's a lot of leaving of blanks, of searching, of responding, of selecting, of accumulating, of shuffling and reshuffling in this shared vocabulary that we've developed. The Chapmans also, you see very much motifs that are recurring, that come up in one work, they are submerged, and then they come back up again. And so you can get this sort of linear and non-linear reading of their practice over time. In terms of a long conversation or a conversational return, you can have this sort of slow conversational relay. Suzanne and I have been working together now for 10 years, and that collaboration has given us confidence to take creative risks. On a practical level, we have this process of taking turns, which has meant we can follow multiple paths simultaneously, be it professional or personal, independent curatorial projects, being part of other teams, curatorial and research and otherwise, as well as having children, family, and keeping somehow a lot of these balls in the air. Susanna was part of another collaborative project, which was known as the Leeds 13. It was a little bit more of an experimental project in terms of putting out into the world fictional exhibitions. It caused a little bit of a furor kind of around the early 90s. And I've been part of teams working with the Canadian Centre for Architecture and now working in Istanbul. In terms of the shared identity, we work under pseudonym, and that can be for better and for worse, especially as leisure is a word we chose quite early on, and now it seems to be a place that we have inhabited and are involved in intimately. Our process is intuitive, it's often visual or narrative. In past projects, we've tried to illustrate that conversation by creating a narrative and pairing existing images. To bring Susanna's voice to the table, we thought it could be interesting to revisit a short interview, which was a conversation between the two of us a few years ago, where we talked about talking again. And so I'll talk today about talking from this other time. This is an interview that took place over 3 days with Penelope Smart, who was doing her MFA thesis in research and criticism and curatorial practice at the Ontario College of Art and Design. It was rambling discussion, which Penny kindly edited into something a little bit more succinct to bring out some of the key points and strategies she thought were interesting to deal with in terms of collaboration and conversation. She titled the transcripts Weird Loops, which I think came from us, and it's a conversation about collaboration. Some of the questions that she was really looking at in terms of conversation and collaboration were how do collaborators start a project? How do people make decisions together? Why use discussion to frame a critical practice in a shared space? So why do we need a spatial narrative at all? How do collaborators sustain a critical conversation over time? So I'll read from these sort of 3 voices at the table, as well as some of her notes that she included in the transcript. So we begin with the sound of scribbling pencil on paper. Penelope Smart, throughout this transcript, will now be P. It seems like instinct flows through everything that happens here. And maybe you can talk a little bit about instinct, about critical instinct. I mean, we've talked a little bit about curatorial and artistic instincts and crossover or sometimes pull away from each other at different moments. The next part was Meredith Carruthers, who will now be known as M. I think a good example is what Susanna was describing in the moments when we both know a project has gone off track. It's a very instinctual thing. Usually we both go away from the table and separately come to know that whatever we're working on has gone in the wrong direction. Susanna replied, it's completely there. I mean, I don't know quite how to talk about it. It's all about getting to that space where we get excited and uncomfortable, and we do that together, and then there's a walking away and a figuring it out, And part of this is this other thing that we've talked about, where one person is maybe down and one person's up, creatively thinking, and that works in all different ways. It can be as far as how we feel about a project, and sometimes we're both down, but eventually one of us will be down and the other one will be up, and there's laughter in the room. Or not just in a creative way, but an administrative way, too. You know that when one person flags a bit for various reasons, or they're just really tired, and that other person can kind of pick it up. But it's really all back and forth in a way. I replied, maybe that's also connected to what Penelope was talking about with the idea of patience and slowness in a way of working. Maybe that's why we're drawn to collaborate as well. I was working with an artist on a show, and at one point found it really perplexing to work with an artist background, but also to intervene into someone else's practice, wondering why I would want to work with another artist at all. And he was really curious about that. And on one level, I just really get bored of my own ideas. If I have to follow through on my own idea, I know where it's going and it doesn't go to another place. Susanna replied, I'm the same way, and it's become more so since we've become so accustomed to collaborating. Back to me, and the way that we work, you know, one person might have an idea that they bring to the table, but then when you pass it to the other person, it comes back to you refreshed and new. And you get to see it in another way, and it's better. It's just always better. Susanna replied, ideas do hang around, you know. Some ideas that I've had for my own projects have just been hanging around for a couple of years, but they rarely get back to me in a new way. Instead, they just hang out there on a hook over in the corner. Penelope said, don't they evolve? Susanna says, yes, up to a certain point, briefly, but if I don't get right down to them right away, they just keep, you know, hanging there. Whereas with Meredith, I can keep it going back and forth, and also just get back to the ideas of patience. It's funny because I was talking to Mark, which is Susanna's husband, when we were looking at an artist whose work is similar to ours, but they were making a lot of work very rapidly, and we just don't do that. Because we're more doing other things, we're involved in research and involved in this shared investigation. But if you're a solitary person and you sit there, in terms of an art practice, you sit there with your idea. And it's all you, and it's your idea, and it's your studio, and you're there always for hours and hours and hours, and you work it out. I replied, maybe some artists have that relationship with the making. They have the idea, and then there's the physical manifestation of it. Yes, said Susanna, an artist's relationship with the making. Whereas we take it back and forth, and we talk, and it goes back and forth, and it goes in one direction, and then in another direction. Meredith says, so that's what we were talking about yesterday, about the conversation itself being a medium. Yeah, says Susanna. Because if you have a solitary studio practice, say you do a collage, for example, you would sit in your studio and you would have an idea, and the collage would change the idea and it would give it back to you. And maybe you would express it again through a different collage and it would come back to you. But instead we have a discursive loop. Susanna, yes, between us, me. So we don't have much evidence of our own production or manifestation through objects. Susanna. And also, Mark was saying, the other thing you have about being someone who works alone is that anytime you want, you can work on your artwork, whereas we wait around to meet with each other. Me. And there's always a period of reconnecting. Over a period of 10 years, we've had spans of more productive time, and then we can reach our collaborative mind space more easily, and other times where we can't really go there. It's weird. Susanna, when our babies were little, we would spend a lot of time talking about what we were doing or how we were struggling with that. And that was our time, you know, once a week where we were gonna meet up, and we wouldn't do it. We couldn't quite, well, we made other projects. We made a show during that time, but we just couldn't jump into that place. We couldn't go to that place. Meredith, even yesterday when we were going through the notes for our projects and shows, people end up being quite fascinated by the fact that we collaborate, sometimes more fascinated by this fact of collaboration than really the product of the collaboration at all. I mean, people are drawn to talk to us because they see a show or they see something we did, but then they get really curious about what it is. You know, what is that space? So we've spent a lot of time trying to articulate what that space is. It's funny, I was talking to my husband, Doug, and he was like, you can't just make collaboration about collaboration. It's just a weird loop. And I said, yes, it is. It is a weird loop. Oh, I can't wait to tell Susanna. Penelope, but it's not always a loop because things come out of it, right? Susanna says, yes, exactly. It doesn't just feed on itself, it goes somewhere. Penelope, I mean, it's a loop because it seems important that it goes this way as opposed to going in a straight line. She makes a hand gesture. Aha, says Meredith, but you didn't make a loop, you made a Mobius. yes, it's a loop that doesn't go in a circle. It can go a lot of other places. And the conversation ends with mugs and cups and things being set down, more sounds of pencil scribbling.
Okay, that was fantastic. We're gonna be open for questions. Je vais demander à Julia et Christine, on va peut-être rajouter 2 petites chaises sur les bouts, comme ça on peut... ouais, je pense comme ça. Oh, ils sont lourds, hein? Je vais aider à Christine. Donc, ça va, Christine? Ouais. Okay. There's a lot to chew on here. And on peut poser nos questions en anglais ou français, English or French. And mon collègue Daniel, qui est en arrière, il peut aussi faire les traductions beaucoup mieux que moi. Donc, si jamais vous voulez poser vos questions, soit en anglais ou français, aux conférenciers, and they're getting, pretty complex, then Danielle will help out with translation back there. Questions, burning questions for our panelists? And I'll run around with this microphone. You're going to force me to ask the first question? Well, bien, j'avais une réflexion par rapport à votre intervention, Christine. C'était la question de... et c'est lié un peu avec la question de affect que Harvey a soulevée. Je vais essayer de la formuler le mieux possible, mais qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? Ce que j'entends souvent des Chapman, c'est qu'ils essaient de concilier d'une certaine manière leur culpabilité en tant que citoyens de l'Occident, confortables, mais qui sont bien conscientes du mal, et ils essaient d'exercer cette pulsion dans leur travail, dans leur art. Mais c'est aussi une façon de nous impliquer, parce qu'en tant que des gens qui regardent, parce que je joue beaucoup avec regarder, philosophiquement, qu'est-ce qu'on fait avec ça?
C'est une question, différentes questions qu'on pourrait se poser qui sont contenues dans cette question. Il y a la question de savoir qu'est-ce qu'on devrait faire du point de vue moral pour être une bonne personne. Ça paraît un peu ridicule comme question quand on regarde, quand on pense à toutes ces œuvres, mais c'est une question qui, disons, occupe les philosophes et les éthiciens. Ils ont des réponses. C'est compliqué, être une bonne personne, cultiver les vertus, éviter les vices, des choses comme ça. Mais je crois que plus concrètement, la question qui confronte n'importe quelle personne qui vit dans notre société, c'est effectivement ce sens de culpabilité, de difficulté, d'éviter par le moindre geste de créer du tort à d'autres personnes. Le moindre café risque d'être un café qui a été produit de manière non équitable et des choses de ce genre. Et à partir de là, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire concrètement? Je ne suis pas sûre que moi j'aurais tendance à vouloir faire une œuvre d'art, mais je ne crois pas non plus que c'est ça que les frères Chapman essaient de faire pour répondre à ce sens de la culpabilité. Ce qu'ils essaient de faire, c'est quelque chose de plus abstrait, qui est quand même plus proche du travail des philosophes, en disant, regardez, il y a un problème, le mal, il a l'air très répandu, tout le monde a l'air coupable, comment réagir par rapport à ça? Et là, ça renvoie la balle à la réflexion, en fait. Et je ne crois pas qu'on puisse, disons, être moins coupable, se sentir moins coupable si on a représenté des clowns sur des crucifixes. Ça, je ne pense pas que ça marcherait. Par contre, de poser la question et d'essayer d'y travailler, de voir ce qu'on pourrait faire pour changer les choses, donc prendre par rapport aux 2 attitudes que j'avais esquissées, le fatalisme où on doit se dire ben, c'est universel, il n'y a rien à faire, c'est dans la nature humaine, ou bien une attitude plus active, militante. C'est plutôt l'autre attitude qui nous permettrait de nous débarrasser du sens de la culpabilité, mais par contre, c'est la difficulté de savoir quoi faire. Donc c'est la réflexion qui permettrait de nous aider à déterminer quoi faire pour changer les personnes. On parle beaucoup d'éducation morale, d'éducation des émotions, changer les contextes, ne pas se mettre, pour prendre un exemple concret, ne pas se mettre dans des situations où l'autorité peut avoir un impact tel sur nous, où on serait capable ensuite de torturer, faire du mal, comme dans les expériences de milligrammes. Une fois qu'on sait qu'il y a ce genre de contexte, on peut travailler à partir de là. Donc ça, c'est des pistes pour la deuxième sorte de réponse, plus militante, plus active. Je pense que c'est de ce côté-là qu'il faudrait aller quand même en fin de compte. Donc le fatalisme et le pessimisme qui pourrait se dégager de ces œuvres, mais je ne crois pas que c'est vraiment ça qui se dégage. Moi, j'y souscrirais pas.
Thank you. I have a very short question, and so I don't expect a very long answers either. But thank you for bringing together all of these very, very different perspectives. I think they're important to see how they're in conversation with each other. So I thought I would ask this question to sorry, no glasses, Julia, yeah, and Dr. Harvey, perhaps. I can't help but wonder how a Black visitor to the exhibition might feel and respond to the Chapman brothers' work. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts towards this. Thank you.
C'est vrai que malaise, j'avoue que c'est évident. Je sais pas comment eux ont. Do you understand French or is it alright? Okay, I'm uncomfortable. But they are uncomfortable. J'ai pas de réponse précise à ça. C'est sûr que tout le monde ressent un malaise, mais je pense que quand déjà une position, quelqu'un est en position de minorité ou visible, c'est certain que ça peut être quelque chose d'assez confrontationnel et de très difficile. Je sais pas si peut-être en fait même les employés de la DHC, est-ce que vous avez eu des réactions viscérales? Parce que ça peut pas eu trop de lancer sur les œuvres, non? Mais je veux dire, vous n'avez pas eu de critiques si personnelles peut-être par rapport aux œuvres, non? C'est une bonne chose. Oui. Parce que j'ai pas
It's a very difficult question to answer because, of course, what the Chapmans do is take every characteristic of all of us and make us all feel uncomfortable about everything about us. It's a pretty grim vision in a way. So the particularities, I think they kind of try to pretend there's no such thing as normative social behavior. They cut right through it. And the result is pretty startling. And that's what I meant about this show being a reflection back to us, not exactly about human nature, because that's a debatable kind of thing, and whether there's a human nature. It keeps on evolving. But we are faced with the outering of our violence, our prejudice, our entanglement with how funny we think even the worst things are, in a way that I think puts us very much on edge about the kinds of question you're asking, but makes us think about is there any kind of possibility, not for redemption, as I said before, but for exploration and honest inquiry?
I thought I might just answer Julia's question, which is to say that there hasn't been a lot of physical I mean, other than the kind of reaction that Christine was sharing with us, nobody has been really, really angry that I've seen, although the people to ask if you come back are the security guards, because they have interesting stories. One of the security guards said that there was a nun actually going through the show, and she said to him, "You're gonna burn in hell." Yeah. But no, there's been no attack on the work, so to speak, which is interesting. I mean, there is a marked difference between the critical reaction and public reaction to their work from the early 90s and now. Clearly, transgressive art has kind of passed from the television or Monty Python and whatnot, and gotten into and sensitized us in a more general way where we can see the humor, and I think that was really interesting. This idea that Thanatos and Eros kind of cannot be disentangled, and that the humor is the glue, because and they would acknowledge that is the thing that they want people to really attach to, which then makes for a laboratory space to think of all of these ideas that are uncomfortable. In terms of visitors, Black visitors, we have had quite a few, and it's always been a very open and inquisitive reaction. Just sort of like, this is interesting, this is funny, but I guess surprising, because we were concerned too that there might be some we were like all telling each other, we just have to be prepared. This could be really, it could be offend people, but through it all, we always just tell each other that's what art should do, not offend us, but it should not leave us indifferent. So even when people think they're just going after the easiest targets ever, like why not be critical of Great Britain? Like, why don't they do that? So then we can get into a discussion on, well, what are artists obligated to do? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Donc, on va clore. Je remercie très fortement les conférenciers qui m'ont beaucoup réfléchi. Je pense que je vais continuer. Je pense que vous aussi. I want to thank my colleagues, in particular Victoria Carrasco, for coordinating this event. I want to thank our technicians, and I also want to thank my colleagues in the education department who've given me a lot of support and given each other, I hope, a lot of support throughout this show, which continues until August 31st. So please come back. And once again, thanks to Canadian Art for co-presenting this event. Stay with us if you want to have a glass of wine or something. Merci beaucoup.